Many men have been conditioned from a young age to believe that emotional expression is a weakness. They grow up hearing things like man up, don't cry, stay strong, and real men don't talk about their feelings. Over time, these messages become embedded in their identity until silence becomes their default reaction to emotional pain. This means that when a man is hurting because of something you said, something you did, or even something you didn't do, his first instinct may not be to talk about it. His first instinct may be to shut down, to withdraw, to quietly carry that weight on his shoulders without ever revealing how heavy it truly is. When a man is emotionally invested in someone, especially a woman he deeply cares about, the emotional bond runs deep. If that bond begins to feel strained or uncertain, he might not always express it in a way that's obvious. Instead, he retreats into himself. He becomes quieter, less engaged. He may not initiate conversations like he used to. He may start giving short answers instead of diving into meaningful dialogue. The once lively energy in his voice fades, replaced with a dull and disconnected tone. And the heartbreaking truth is that many women interpret this silence as rejection, not realizing that it could be the very opposite, could be the sound of him suffering in silence. You might think he's just busy or distracted, but he's actually drowning in thoughts he doesn't know how to verbalize. Thoughts like, did I say something wrong? Am I not enough for her anymore? Why do I feel like I'm not being heard or appreciated? But instead of bringing those questions to the surface, he keeps them buried. Why? Because for many men, speaking about emotional pain doesn't feel safe. It feels like exposure, like vulnerability, like stepping into a battlefield without armor. So they choose silence. They choose distance, not because they want to hurt you, but because they don't know how to handle being hurt by you. That emotional withdrawal can be confusing, especially if you're someone who communicates openly and needs verbal affirmation to feel connected. You might ask him what's wrong, and he'll respond with nothing. You might say, talk to me, and he'll say, I'm fine. But he's not fine. Inside, there's turmoil. Inside, there's a sense of emotional disconnection that he doesn't have the words to explain. So instead of talking about it, he pulls away. He creates emotional space, hoping that the distance will protect him from further disappointment or pain. This kind of withdrawal is not only about avoiding confrontation, it's also about preserving his sense of identity. Many men attach their worth to their ability to be strong, composed, and unaffected. When they start feeling too deeply, they begin to feel weak, and weakness to them feels like failure. So when the pain comes, especially pain inflicted by someone they love, they suppress it. They lock it away. They tell themselves it's not a big deal. But over time, that unaddressed pain turns into resentment, self-doubt, and quiet suffering that eats away at their peace. It's also important to understand that this withdrawal doesn't happen overnight. It's gradual. It begins with small things. He stops telling you about his day. He stops sharing what excites him or what bothers him. He stops laughing at your jokes or making plans for the future. At first, it just seems like he's tired. But what's really happening is emotional self-preservation. He's protecting what's left of his heart because somewhere along the way it began to feel unsafe with you, not necessarily because you intended to hurt him, but because something happened that he hasn't figured out how to process. And here's the most misunderstood part of it all. Men don't always suffer from grand betrayals. Sometimes it's the accumulation of small disappointments, the constant interruptions when he tries to speak, the dismissive tone, the lack of appreciation, the feeling of being invisible even when he's right there in front of you. And because these things feel too small to bring up, he chooses to internalize them, to toughen up, to act like they don't matter. But they do. They matter deeply. You might notice that he starts spending more time alone, more time on his phone, more time at work or with friends. It's not always because he's losing interest. Sometimes he's searching for refuge, a place where he can feel seen without having to explain himself, a place where he can breathe without feeling judged or dismissed. And yet, even in those spaces, the pain lingers. Because the one person he wants to open up to, the one person who could bring him peace, is also the one person he feels unsafe being vulnerable with. This silence becomes a silent scream, a cry for help that comes without sound, without words. It's a language of pain that many people overlook. And when you try to understand him through a logical or surface level lens, you'll miss the depth of what he's going through. You'll think he doesn't care. You'll think he's cold or disconnected. But if you could see inside his heart, you'd see the damage. You'd see the wounds. You'd see the silent suffering. When a man is silently suffering, he doesn't always express his pain in obvious or dramatic ways. One of the most overlooked signs is a subtle shift in his routine. These aren't loud signals. They're not explosive arguments or grand exits. They're quiet changes, the kind that only someone who's truly paying attention would notice. These shifts are his way of coping, of protecting himself from further emotional strain, and yet they are often mistaken for carelessness or loss of interest. In truth, they're signs that something deep inside him is unraveling, that he's wrestling with emotions he doesn't know how to confront or explain. Think about how he used to engage in the relationship. Maybe he used to send good morning texts. Maybe he always checked in during the day. Perhaps he'd make time to call you at night, no matter how tired he was. These weren't just habits. They were emotional investments. They were signs that he was present, available, and connected. But when those gestures begin to fade, it's easy to assume he's pulling away because he no longer cares. What's more likely, though, is that those small habits have become emotionally taxing. When a man is suffering internally, even the simplest routines can feel heavy. They become reminders of a connection he feels slipping through his fingers, but doesn't know how to salvage. He might still be physically present, still going through the motions, waking up, going to work, coming home. But the energy behind his actions has shifted. He moves slower, talks less, smiles less. There's a subtle dullness in his eyes, a quiet disengagement from the world around him. And unless you've been emotionally attuned to him, you might miss these changes or dismiss them as mood swings or burnout. But in reality, these small deviations are silent cries. They're his way of expressing something inside me doesn't feel right, without ever having to say those words out loud. Another sign you'll notice is his disinterest in things he once enjoyed doing with you. Maybe he used to plan weekend getaways, cook with you, or suggest new places to explore together. Now he brushes off the idea of doing anything special. He may still go along with plans, but his enthusiasm is gone. The spark isn't there. It's not that he doesn't want to enjoy life with you. It's that his emotional bandwidth has been depleted. When a man is silently suffering, joy feels distant. Even things that used to bring him happiness can feel like chores. It's not laziness. It's emotional exhaustion. It's the invisible weight of feeling unfulfilled, misunderstood, or emotionally disconnected. You may even notice changes in how he takes care of himself. Grooming habits may change. His sleep schedule becomes inconsistent. He might start eating less or indulging more. These aren't just health fluctuations. They're symptoms of inner turmoil. His routine has been disrupted because his internal world is out of alignment, And he might not even realize it. All he knows is that something feels off. Something's broken inside him, and instead of fixing it, he tries to function around it. Like limping on a broken leg, he pushes through his pain silently, hoping no one will notice the limp, hoping it will fix itself if he just keeps moving. Another overlooked pattern is how he begins to avoid certain situations or conversations. Maybe he used to be excited to come home or to talk about the future. Now he avoids discussing anything that requires emotional involvement. Plans become vague, answers become non-committal. We'll see, or maybe later replaces I can't wait. That uncertainty isn't always about indecision. It's about not having the emotional clarity to make commitments. When a man is silently suffering, he avoids confrontation, not because he doesn't care, but because he fears he won't be able to handle the truth of what's really happening inside him. So he detaches, he delays, he drifts. Even how he speaks changes. He becomes more subdued, less expressive. You might ask him how his day was, and he'll give one-word answers. You might share something important to you, and he'll nod but not engage. These aren't signs of arrogance or coldness. They're signs of an emotional shutdown. A man who's suffering internally may no longer have the emotional energy to pour into conversations, especially if those conversations require vulnerability or conflict resolution. So instead of connecting, he defaults to safe, surface-level interactions that demand less of him emotionally. And if you're not careful, you'll begin to mirror his withdrawal. You'll start to think he doesn't love you anymore, that he's bored, that he's found someone else. But more often than not, he hasn't. What he's lost isn't his love for you. It's his connection to himself. And without that connection, without that sense of inner grounding, everything else starts to slip. He doesn't know how to say, I feel like I'm losing myself. So instead, he skips the gym. He skips your texts. He skips moments of intimacy. These aren't acts of rebellion. They're signs of emotional disorientation. And it's easy to overlook all of this because society doesn't teach us to look for emotional shifts in men. We're trained to assume that if a man is quiet, he's fine. If he's showing up, he's strong. If he's not crying, he's unaffected. But men learn to hide their pain behind structure and routine. So when that routine starts to crumble, even in the smallest ways, that's when you should really pay attention. Because beneath those small changes lies something deeper. An emotional struggle that he's too afraid, too proud, or too broken to voice. One of the most telling signs that a man is silently suffering because of you, yet will never admit it, is his increasing emotional distance. It doesn't happen all at once. It starts in the smallest, quietest ways. He becomes less available, not in terms of presence, but in terms of connection. His responses get shorter, his eyes less engaged, and his spirit begins to shrink into silence. He may still say, I'm here, but what you feel is a void, an emotional absence that lingers even in his physical presence. It's as though he's learned to put up an invisible wall around his emotions, one that he built brick by brick to protect himself from further hurt. This emotional distance is not always a result of loss of love. It is more often a form of self-preservation. When a man feels misunderstood, unappreciated, or dismissed over time, he doesn't always lash out. Instead, he shuts down. He folds inward. His silence becomes his defense. He may not even know how to explain it. He may not even know what specific moment triggered it. He just knows something inside of him started to feel unsafe, unwelcome, or You might notice that the emotional distance shows up during conversations. Maybe you once talked for hours, shared your dreams, laughed about the smallest things, or opened up about your fears. But now, there's a coldness, a vagueness. When you try to connect, he gives you logical answers, not emotional ones. He might still say he's fine or just tired, but the truth is that something deeper is going on. He's withdrawing emotionally, not because he wants to leave, but because he doesn't feel like there's room for his emotions to be held or respected. Men are often taught from a young age that vulnerability is weakness. So when they feel pain, especially emotional pain caused by someone they care about, they don't always communicate it directly. They don't always say, "That hurt me," or "I feel unseen." Instead, they build emotional armor. That armor looks like silence. It looks like indifference. It looks like choosing not to argue anymore, not because he agrees with you, but because he's decided there's no point in fighting for something that doesn't feel safe. He'd rather detach emotionally than risk more rejection or misunderstanding. You may find that he no longer shares parts of his life with you, not out of secrecy, but out of defeat. Maybe he used to tell you about his work struggles, family dynamics, or personal aspirations, but now he keeps those details to himself. This isn't about pride, it's about exhaustion. When a man feels like his emotions have been minimized or dismissed too many times, he stops offering them. Not because he doesn't trust you entirely, but because he no longer trusts that opening up will lead to comfort. He fears it will only lead to conflict or more disconnection. Even in intimacy, the emotional distance shows. He may still touch you, kiss you, or hold you, but the warmth feels mechanical. The connection feels shallow, and that's not because he doesn't want to feel close. It's because he feels a quiet sadness inside that he's trying to suppress. And emotional intimacy requires openness, not just proximity. So even when he's physically near, you'll feel like he's miles away. That gap you sense in his eyes, in his energy, is the silent suffering he won't admit to. You may try to initiate emotional conversations, asking him what's wrong or how he feels, and he'll likely deflect. He might say nothing, or "I'm just stressed." But the stress isn't always about work or finances. It's emotional stress. It's the weight of feeling emotionally alone, even when he's in a relationship. It's the burden of loving someone while slowly feeling like that love is being chipped away by unmet emotional needs, unresolved arguments, or recurring miscommunications. There's also a change in the way he protects his peace. He may begin to isolate more, spend more time alone. He might seek solitude not because he doesn't want to be around you, but because being around you now stirs up too much unspoken emotion. It feels complicated, heavy. So he chooses the quiet over confrontation. He chooses withdrawal over vulnerability. Because to him, saying, "I'm hurting because of you," would be too raw, too exposing. So he says nothing. He just becomes a little quieter, a little colder, a little harder to reach. In this emotional distance, he may even start questioning his own worth. He wonders if he's good enough, if his feelings are valid, or if his presence really matters. And yet, he keeps showing up. That's the paradox. He stays, he continues the routine, but his heart no longer leads, it follows hesitantly. He's afraid to hope, afraid to give more of himself, because each emotional investment feels riskier than the last. So when he seems emotionally distant, it's not always a sign of the end. Sometimes it's a cry for emotional safety. Sometimes it's a man's way of saying, "I want to love you without feeling like I have to defend my emotions." But he won't say that out loud. He'll suffer silently, hoping you notice, hoping you ask, not once, but repeatedly, sincerely, until he finally feels like his heart has room to speak without judgment or fear. Another deeply telling sign that a man is silently suffering because of you is when he starts overcompensating with kindness, politeness, or giving you everything you want while secretly breaking on the inside. On the surface, he seems agreeable. He's doing what you ask, showing up on time, supporting you, and playing the role of the perfect partner. But if you look deeper, there's a quiet sadness in his eyes. His actions are not always driven by love anymore. They're often fueled by fear. The fear of losing you. The fear of conflict. The fear of not being enough. And so instead of expressing what he really feels, he masks it with performance. He becomes what he thinks you want, not who he really is. This type of overcompensation is subtle. It's easy to mistake it for maturity or genuine care. And sometimes it truly does come from a place of love. But in many cases, it's a survival mechanism. He has felt unheard or emotionally punished so many times that he no longer feels safe expressing his frustrations, his boundaries, or his truth. So he bends. He gives in. He avoids disagreement, even when he's not okay. He chooses peace on the outside while chaos brews on the inside. That inner conflict is what silently eats away at him. When a man begins to suffer in silence, one of the first things he often does is suppress his own needs. He puts them aside for yours. He tells himself, it's not worth bringing this up, or I'll just deal with it. He convinces himself that maintaining the harmony in the relationship is more important than being fully honest about his emotional experience. He may let you make all the decisions not because he agrees, but because he fears that asserting himself will lead to argument or rejection. He starts walking on emotional eggshells, calculating every response, trying not to rock the boat. This isn't love in its highest form. It's quiet suffering disguised as sacrifice. You'll notice that he starts to avoid conversations where he has to express his emotional reality. He becomes a yes man, always agreeing, always accommodating, but no longer contributing from the heart. And here's the tragedy. Many women misinterpret this behavior as contentment or emotional stability. They think he's fine, he's always calm, he never complains, but what they don't see is that his calmness is not peace. It's a resignation. A quiet voice inside him has already accepted that his feelings won't be prioritized. So he's chosen silence over self-expression. He has become emotionally invisible to protect the relationship from falling apart. Overcompensation can also show up in grand gestures. He might buy gifts, go out of his way to plan things, or support you financially or emotionally beyond his limits. Not because he feels full and overflowing, but because he's trying to hold the relationship together by over-delivering. He believes that if he gives enough, maybe you won't see how broken he feels. Maybe you won't notice the pain he doesn't have the words to express. His kindness becomes a mask, a performance, a way to stay close to someone he feels distant from on an emotional level. What makes this form of suffering even more dangerous is that it's often rewarded. The more he suppresses and sacrifices, the more praise he receives. He's such a good man, others say. He's so easygoing. But inside he's crumbling. He's sacrificing his emotional well-being to keep you happy. And yet there's no room for his truth. He may want to say, this hurts me, or I need more understanding. But those words stay locked inside, buried under layers of fear, pride, and unresolved pain. The most painful part is that his love becomes a burden he carries alone. He's giving so much of himself while quietly losing touch with who he really is. He no longer recognizes his own emotional needs because he has trained himself to ignore them. The relationship becomes one-sided, but not in a visible way. It looks balanced, it looks functional, but it's emotionally lopsided. One person is thriving while the other is slowly disappearing into the background, trying to love without being fully seen or heard. And still, he doesn't complain, he doesn't argue, he doesn't lash out, because he's afraid that the moment he does, everything will fall apart. So he keeps showing up. He keeps loving in the way he knows how, even if it costs him his own peace. That is the quiet torment of a man who is overcompensating while suffering. His silence isn't strength, it's survival. His kindness isn't always joy, it's a way to cope. And his loyalty isn't always contentment, it's a plea for emotional safety in a space where he no longer feels emotionally at home. One of the clearest signs that a man is silently suffering because of you, and he will never admit it, is when he begins to withdraw emotionally while remaining physically present. He shows up in the room, he listens when you speak, he does what he's supposed to do, but he's not really there. His eyes don't light up like they used to. His laughter feels forced. His words are measured, not free-flowing. You sense the distance, but you can't quite explain it because nothing dramatic has happened. There was no loud argument, no obvious conflict, yet something is missing. That missing piece is emotional connection, and he's slowly retreating from it in silence. Emotional withdrawal is a coping mechanism. It is what a man turns to when he feels like expressing his feelings leads nowhere. Maybe he's tried before. Maybe he's hinted that something was bothering him. Maybe he's used gentle words to say, "That hurt me," or "I wish you saw it differently." But each time his voice was dismissed, minimized, or met with defensiveness. Over time, he learns that saying how he feels only makes things worse. So he shuts down emotionally to protect him. He turns his heart inward. He builds walls, not to punish you, but to shield himself from repeated wounds. And those walls don't go up in a single moment. They rise slowly, brick by brick, over months of silent suffering. When a man emotionally withdraws, you may start to notice subtle changes in how he interacts with you. The conversations become shorter, the depth fades away. He no longer volunteers information about his day, his dreams, or his fears. You might find yourself always being the one to initiate meaningful conversation, only to be met with lukewarm responses. His presence begins to feel hollow, like he's fulfilling an obligation rather than nurturing a connection. And still, he's not angry, he's not rude, he's just distant. This kind of quiet withdrawal is often misread as disinterest, when in reality, it's a sign of internal emotional fatigue. He may still offer physical affection, a hug, a kiss, a touch on the shoulder, but the warmth behind it feels different. It's as if he's going through the motions, not because he doesn't care, but because he no longer knows how to reach you with his truth. He fears that if he opens up, he'll be misunderstood or judged, so he settles for silence. This is where many women get confused. They see a man who's still physically present, still providing, still functioning, and they think everything must be okay. But emotional absence is not something you can measure with acts of service or presence alone. It is a quiet erosion of connection that happens under the surface. The tragedy here is that this kind of suffering is invisible. A man who is emotionally withdrawing doesn't make dramatic exits. He doesn't cry in the corner or lash out in frustration. He becomes polite, predictable, passive, He's learned how to coexist without truly connecting. He might still compliment you. He might still say, I love you. But you'll feel the difference. You'll sense that his words don't land with the same weight they once did. That's because his emotional energy is running on reserve. He's giving from a place that is slowly being depleted, and yet he doesn't complain. He won't say it's your fault. He won't explain how it got this far. He just keeps fading quietly. At this stage, even joy becomes difficult for him to access. Things that used to excite him now feel dull. He no longer shares his creative ideas, his opinions, or his spontaneous thoughts because he no longer feels emotionally safe to be himself. He might still participate in family gatherings, date nights, or social events, but there's a blankness in his expression, a numbness, like someone going through life on autopilot. That numbness is not apathy, it's protection. It's what happens when someone has tried again and again to connect and failed. When a man feels that his emotions are not valued, he retreats, not because he wants to leave, but because staying has become a quiet kind of pain. This emotional withdrawal can even extend to intimacy. He may avoid deep eye contact during lovemaking. He may become less expressive physically, not out of rejection, but because his heart isn't fully in it anymore. He's guarding himself even in moments that are meant to be vulnerable. Not because he wants to hurt you, but because he doesn't know how to let you back in without reopening old wounds. He's afraid of giving more of himself and getting nothing in return emotionally. He's afraid of being exposed again, only to be misunderstood or ignored. And yet, despite all of this, he still stays. He doesn't walk away. He doesn't threaten the relationship. That's what makes it so hard to detect. His loyalty masks his pain. His commitment hides his suffering. He believes that leaving would make him a failure, or that expressing how deeply he's hurting would only create more conflict. So he stays, silently dying inside, trying to keep the peace while losing parts of himself in the process. And the saddest part is, no one around him even notices, because he looks fine. He's functioning. He's dependable. But emotional withdrawal isn't something you can see on the surface. It's something you feel in the quiet, in the coldness, in the gaps between two people who used to be close, but now live behind emotional walls. When a man feels that he's constantly misunderstood by the woman he loves, it chips away at the very foundation of his emotional security. Being misunderstood isn't just about words being twisted or intentions being questioned. It's much deeper than that. It's about the pain of trying to explain your heart and having it overlooked. It's the frustration of feeling like your silence is misread as indifference, your patience mistaken for passivity, and your vulnerability perceived as weakness. When a man continuously experiences this kind of emotional dissonance, he doesn't always speak up. Instead, he suffers quietly, often blaming himself first, then shutting down slowly. A man who feels misunderstood stops sharing, not because he no longer wants to connect, but because he starts to believe that no matter how carefully he speaks, his words won't be heard the way he intends. That realization becomes a heavy burden. It's exhausting to constantly defend your emotions, to clarify your motives, and to feel like your heart is on trial every time you open up. So he chooses silence, not because he wants to disconnect, but because he's tired of fighting for the right to feel. He's tired of being told he's too sensitive, or that he's overthinking things, or worse, that his perspective is invalid. The truth is, most men aren't trained to articulate their inner world. They grew up in environments where emotional expression is not always encouraged. Vulnerability is often linked with shame. So, when a man does open up, it's a monumental act of courage. He's stepping outside of what the world has told him is acceptable. And if, when he does, he's met with mockery, judgment, or minimization, it hits him in a place that's very raw. Over time, he learns that keeping quiet is safer than being misinterpreted. He learns that retreating is better than risking another emotional wound. And the woman in his life may never realize how many times he's tried to speak before deciding to remain silent. You can see this happening in small moments. He might begin to delay conversations that once happened naturally. He might hesitate before giving his opinion. He might deflect when asked how he's feeling, responding with a non-committal "I'm fine," because he doesn't believe his deeper truth will be received with compassion. And when this happens repeatedly, he starts to internalize the belief that his emotional needs are too much, or worse, irrelevant. This can create a quiet despair, one that is difficult to describe and even harder to detect from the outside. When a man feels like no one truly sees or hears him, it can lead to a deep sense of isolation, even in a committed relationship. He begins to feel alone, not physically, but emotionally. He might still go through the motions, show up where he's expected to, fulfill his responsibilities and be present, but inside he's fading. He may laugh with others, but it doesn't reach his eyes. He may smile when you speak, but that's the survival instinct kicking in, protecting him from more misunderstanding, more emotional injury. His silence isn't punishment, it's self-preservation. What makes this dynamic even more complex is the paradox it creates. He wants closeness but fears judgment. He longs to be understood but is terrified of being dismissed. So he stays in the shadows of the relationship, doing everything he can to keep it going while hiding the growing emptiness he feels inside. He won't tell you he feels lonely. He won't say that he's hurting because of you, not because he doesn't think you matter, but because he's convinced that saying so will only make things worse. He doesn't want to create conflict. He doesn't want to seem dramatic. So he bottles it up. In some cases, this unspoken suffering manifests in his body. He may experience stress, tension, or fatigue. His sleep may suffer. His energy might decline. And still, he doesn't connect these physical symptoms to emotional misunderstanding. He thinks he's just tired. He believes he's just overworked. But in reality, it's the emotional toll of not being seen, not being heard, not being understood. That internal war creates exhaustion of a different kind, one that doesn't go away with rest, because what he needs isn't sleep, it's safety. The safety to speak and be believed. The safety to feel without being fixed. The safety to be vulnerable without being accused of being weak. This sense of chronic misunderstanding may eventually reshape the way he sees himself. A man who is repeatedly told he's wrong for how he feels will begin to doubt his own emotional compass. He may second guess his instincts. He may silence his opinions before they've even formed. And when a man starts editing himself to fit into a version of reality where he is less likely to be misunderstood, he's no longer fully present in the relationship. He's performing a role, not living his truth. And deep inside, that quiet performance is breaking him. He'll continue to provide, to support, and to do the things expected of him because he equates love with action. But emotional intimacy, which once flowed naturally, now feels foreign. He may crave a safe space, a moment of openness, but he doesn't know how to ask for it anymore. And the longer he goes without it, the more distant he becomes, not in body, but in soul. Misunderstood men don't always leave, but they do begin to disappear within the relation, not out of resentment, but out of resignation. Not because they want to let go, but because they no longer know how to hold on.